Hi, everyone. I hope this presentation reaches you, your family, and loved ones well. I wish I could have made contact with you in Miami, but out of gratitude for the foresight the CEIS Board of Directors had in response to the global coronavirus pandemic, I'm gladly including the presentation I would have given on site in Miami in this virtual form. My name is Danielle Carrier, and I'm new on the CEIS block as a graduate student and former international school educator. The question I was interested in looking deeper into is one that is close to my heart as a former school teacher, international school educator, and teacher educator. The question is, how does international student teaching affect teacher candidate conceptions of what it means to teach? To help me answer this question, I drew on Marks and Moss's literature review of a growing body of research of study abroad and teacher education that suggests that programs would benefit from an expanded theoretical frame, which my study employs. I also drew upon three areas of research in teacher education: neoliberal privatization of teacher education, university-based teacher education, and teacher candidate international field experiences to illuminate the relevance of my study in relation to the wider field of teacher education. Over the past 10 years or so, a growing body of research has mounted regarding neoliberal privatization efforts toward preparing teachers. Referring to neoliberalism as a business-type logic that emphasizes teacher technical preparation over teacher autonomy, decision-making power, and creativity, these studies have shown many of the primarily negative effects and implications of this type of teacher training. Much of the literature on university-based teacher preparation, on the other hand, shows much of the opposite. It should also be noted that university-based teacher preparation is not a perfect solution to the controversies that ensue in teacher education more broadly, but university-based teacher education controversy are out of the purview of this talk. The last area of research that I looked at is most closely aligned with my study and has documented many of the outcomes of international field experiences that teacher candidates have engaged in over the years. Many positive outcomes are explained in these studies' findings, though what is missing is how teacher candidates conceptualize teaching in relation to wider social and political implications of teacher candidates' international teaching experiences. To examine what Greenfell notes as naming what had previously not been named, I used sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's theoretical concepts of cultural capital, field, and habitus to illuminate the complex interplay between teacher candidates' teaching experiences in the US and abroad to help answer my research question, which was, how does international student teaching affect teacher candidate conceptions of what it means to teach? The use of cultural capital, referring to the explicit and implicit knowledge required for success in schools dominated by middle-class norms, allowed me to theorize teacher candidates' background in relation to the dispositions they may possess, which to Bourdieu means habitus, that the teacher candidates may have acquired to help them study abroad. So habitus refers to an individual's dispositions and tendencies to act or respond in certain ways under certain conditions that are structured unconsciously by a person's upbringing and structures future dispositions and behaviors. Teacher candidates' habitus was analyzed to gauge the degree to which teacher candidates' dispositions may have changed given their teaching experiences abroad. The international context was viewed in Bourdieu's terms as the field, which positions the school and community as a social competitive space comprised of individuals vying for desirable social positions, power, resources, and influence that are reflexively mediated by institutional structures and cultural capital. In other words, how did teacher candidates understand the international field with different rules of the game, different notions of power, authority, and knowledge that played out amongst its players? In order to engage, let me get this part here. There we go. In order to engage in the type of complex analysis I sought to help answer my research question, I interviewed 4 teacher candidates from a Southeastern University teacher preparation program to which I am a student teaching supervisor. My convenient sample included Christine, Natalie, Peyton, and Sabine, pseudonyms, all of whom student taught internationally in the fall of 2018. Through individual interviews and document analysis of the International Student Teaching Program and the teacher candidates' reflection essays, I used a combination of deductive and inductive sorting to begin to organize the data. First, I read through the interviews for instances of Bourdieu's concepts of cultural capital, habitus, and field. I then asked questions of the interview data inspired by themes discussed by critical education theorist Deborah Britzman, looking for ways that the teacher candidates understood power, authority, knowledge, and identity. I created boundaries around these terms as to what was included and excluded in the definitions and filtered my interview data accordingly. I created my analyses of inductive emergent themes, looking across teacher candidates' experiences. I highlighted which themes stood out in addition to my strongest teacher candidate voice that was representative of the particular theme in relation to my research question. My findings and interpretations are tied to my own researcher subjectivity, which I explained before is looking at myself as a researcher, as a former student teacher, international school teacher, and teacher educator. My first finding relates to Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital. All of the teacher candidates in this study possessed a high degree of cultural capital. From the teacher candidate's social class standing as middle to upper middle class, to parental and financial support, to prior experience with international travel, to experiences with multiple cultures, the teacher candidates were able to complete the international student teaching application process easily, in part due to their past experiences acquiring cultural capital in this area. In terms of Bourdieu's concept of habitus, the teacher candidates all experienced instances where their teaching dispositions were challenged. Because the school field was different than the US, the teacher candidates noticed how power and authority operated differently in their different school communities. For example, Christine noticed how teachers had more agency in New Zealand, which also trickled down to the students. Students in Christine's classes were engaged in self-directed learning, which meant they didn't have to sit through a whole class lecture about something they already knew. Christine noted how she was affected by this way of teaching and how, in her words, quote, "You allow the students to be creative, and it's when you give them free rein, it's amazing how smart, intelligent, and how much better they grow as people in reading, writing, math, science, in everything, when you give them their own space. You see it, unquote." Christine actually ended up getting a job in New Zealand after her student teaching experience, but she will return to the US beginning this fall to teach. Natalie, also in New Zealand, engaged in critical reflection almost the whole time she was there, but didn't have anyone to bounce her ideas off of until I began working with her in this study. Natalie noticed the opposite of Christine. They were in different schools in different towns in New Zealand, to where Natalie's environment was so loose that it shifted her teaching habitus to crave more structure. Natalie commented, quote, "I think definitely the balance is something that I've never thought about as being as important as it is. I used to be like, we're so strict. We need to be like other countries where they let their kids frolic all day. But I don't know, practically, we do have to sit them down. There does have to be some form of standards. I think just to help students know what they've accomplished and what they haven't. So I think that's a big thing I didn't realize in New Zealand," unquote. It would have been helpful for Natalie to have had a host country faculty in New Zealand help her make sense of her observations historically, socially, and culturally at a greater depth than theorizing on her own, specifically in her school context as well. However, Natalie was able to understand her own US school culture differently by experiencing New Zealand's school field. Sabine's observations of the Ecuadorian field sparked question derived from her emerging teaching habitus around race and social class. As part of a teacher preparation program that is committed to equity and social justice, Sabine noticed a racial divide between white, black, and brown students in Ecuador. The students at her Ecuadorian private school were mostly white. In the wider Ecuadorian community, Sabine said, "So there are black people in Ecuador. You did not see them in that school," unquote. In this instance, Sabine's belief in equity was strengthened as she explained how she believes all students can learn. Her teaching habitus did shift in regard to teaching students English. She commented, quote, "I learned how to diversify so that it's easier for ELL learners to learn. I made sure I always wrote on the board so students learning English would see what the word we were talking about looked like," unquote. The role reversal Sabine experienced as a speaker of the non-dominant language, English, in Ecuador, helped Sabine understand and have compassion for the future ELL students that may be in her future classroom. The experiences of the teacher candidates in my study point to various conclusions I can make based on my analysis. First, because of the international context or field, as Bourdieu conceives of institutional structures and individuals interacting, teacher candidates picked up on different notions of power that circulated in these contexts to help them make sense of their surroundings. Many of their insights challenge their habitus in productive ways. My analysis points to several potentialities that, without more data, cannot be stated as certain. What stands out are the potentialities of reflection, implementing pedagogies that resist status quo teaching in the US, and pedagogies that are more authentically inclusive by nature. My study also raises several questions that would further our current body of research in teacher education study abroad. Research areas include studying ongoing recruitment efforts to diversify who gets to participate in international student teaching. It's important to also look deeper into the role of teacher educators and their partnerships, or lack thereof, with the host country in supporting teacher candidate learning in real time. Last, my study points to the potentialities of experiencing habitus shifts during the time of COVID-19. By analyzing context and adapting to the unfamiliar, future teacher leaders, or anyone, can see that they can be comfortable in and even thrive in exceedingly different conditions, such as this virtual presentation. I thank you for listening, and I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments about my presentation or paper. Stay safe and be well. I had fun.